Hey, good afternoon. This is Angel with Data Core Technology Solutions, and like you saw in the title, you're just not going to believe what I found. It was so bad that I got on the phone with Lisa, and the attorney that we use on a regular basis to work with clients on remediating cybersecurity risks. And I told her, you got to see this. And she said, oh my goodness, that's terrible. So we decided to come on, and actually I've got her here with me. So hi, Lisa.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Angel.
And we decided to just kind of talk about it because there's a ton of stuff to unpack here. And I think we're going to have a couple of resources over the next few days to kind of help you. And you being the general public and business owners alike. I mean, all of us use medical clinics. So we're going to come up with actually Lisa and her partner Natalie have come up with a wonderful resource that we'll make available to you with some questions you can ask your doctor to make sure that they're taking your privacy seriously. So, Lisa,
yes,
you and I just kind of debriefed about it and kind of talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
So before we delve into the list, I've got my original notes here. How bad is this?
It's bad.
Okay.
It's really bad, and I got to tell you, it's not uncommon.
It's not uncommon?
It is not uncommon. Isn't that scary? There are a lot of most of the physicians that I know take HIPAA seriously. However, they believe very, very firmly that it is their office manager and their IT person's problem, and they don't want to be involved, and that's where the breakdown kind of is. So when things have to be done in a different way or anything that inconveniences the doctor, that is often met with some resistance. So
I have a colleague up in New Jersey that you also know, mm-hmm. and I was talking to him about this last week, and he mentioned that one of his doctor clients basically said, until one of my friends or somebody I know gets fined, I'm not spending a dime on this stuff. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I think $50,000 a day is not a good fine to have. I mean, I wouldn't wait until I got one to
Did you just say $50,000 a day?
It can be, yes, it can be.
How does a fine get to that
point?
Per
violation. Oh, it's a long story, but let's start at the more important part, because before everybody goes crazy, what really needs to happen is people just need to take stock of their environment, right? I mean, just like you did, you walked into this practice and you were trying to reflect to them what they might do to help themselves. You know, a lot of times the things that you can do are free or very low cost. Mm-hmm. So it just boggles the mind that you would not at least clean those things up, because those are easy ones, right? They're gimmies. And you can do it yourself. You don't have to pay me. You don't have to pay Angel. You don't have to pay Dan. You don't have to pay anybody. And you know, it's just there's a multitude of things you can do, or very low cost, and you know.
So really, up front, I mean, the first thing is you got to know what's bad before you can start tackling it.
Yeah, I mean, what are you doing that is not either in violation of the law, which would be a really good thing to fix, right?
Sure.
Or not industry best practices, which is also something you should pay attention to, because that's the way you're going to be judged by any regulators or law enforcement.
Okay. Now, when you take stock of this, mm-hmm. Let's say you find a lot of bad stuff, mm-hmm. you don't even know where to get started or how to get started, because a lot of times, I mean, it can really be overwhelming when you start looking at a list of things, and then you start looking what reality is, and you start looking at your budget, and you're thinking, man, something's got to give here. What would you tell an overwhelmed, let's say, physician or an office manager that is just looking at this list of things and doesn't even know where to start?
You know what, Angel? That's probably the best question ever, because this happens all the time. People get stymied by the multitude of things that are handed to them, and here are all your problems, and good luck to you. I think the most important thing to know is what you're expected to do is take reasonable action. You're not supposed to be perfect with security, but you're supposed to care about security, and you have to be diligent with it. So what does that mean? Well, that means take those security risks, those vulnerabilities that you've discovered, and put them on a prioritized list. And generally, if you have technical security issues, they're going to come in a prioritized list because a lot of the scanning software and the protocols that people like you use will hand those to a person like me in a prioritized fashion. So what we say is, let's take care of the most critical items in the first 90 days. That's really what we're supposed to be doing. So let's take care of the most critical ones in the first 90 days. And let's take a deep breath here. Let's put it on a calendar. The way we do it for our clients is we put all of these items onto a compliance calendar, and guess what, guys? We put it on a 52-week calendar. You got a whole year to deal with this. Mm-hmm. And we even program in vacations. We take time for Thanksgiving, Christmas, all the major holidays, wherever you want them. If you want them for Hanukkah or whatever you want, you can take the time off for that, right? But you have to program in certain items within that 52-week period, and you got to front load it with your most critical tasks. We even have a budgeting column. So we make sure that you're budgeting for it here, you're having that discussion, you have time for implementation, education, and launch. So we try to do this in a very easy stepwise fashion so that you can follow it just like a cookbook.
So is there any significance between the 52-week timeline, or did you just randomly
No,
choose
I didn't randomly choose it. What I chose was a timeline between risk assessments that you should be having a risk assessment every 6 months. So we recommend...
every 6 months. I was under the impression that should have been every year.
Well, actually, if you go to D.C. and New York and you listen to the regulators talk, they want to see them continuously.
Right.
Like you end one and you start another.
Right. I
never
understand
ends,
that when I originally started working with the HIPAA stuff, I understood that you wanted to do them annually at the very minimum. And then whenever there were any changes made.
Well, now the sort of mind think is every 4 months. But in Florida, people will do every 6 months. And the way I recommend doing that is you have your third-party risk assessment, from your outside IT people and your lawyers every year. But in the interim, you do an interim risk assessment by yourself. And you can do it because you can use the protocols that we already gave you from your annual risk assessment, and you can do that. Now, I'm not going to say that everybody hires this every year, but I will say that that is really what best practices would be.
Now, a lot of my colleagues like to get these HIPAA in a box solutions that they're good. They do bring up a lot of stuff, and then they print out these great reports and they print out these policies and procedures. But what are the situations where somebody might not want to use one of those pre-done HIPAA from an IT company per se?
Well, probably in every case without some sort of input and guidance, because I think what people do is they feel like if they throw money at it, then they're done, and they've checked that box. And if you do have, the only reason to have this compliance exercise is because you anticipate that at some point you might have a data incident or a breach, and some regulator or law enforcement might be in your offices asking to see what the state of affairs is.
That sounds exciting, having a regulator or law enforcement in your office.
Yeah, especially when they say, "Hi, I'm with the FBI," and you're like, "Why are you here?" So I didn't do it. I mean it. No, but what I would say is all of those things have to be customized. They have to be tailored to your company, because the first thing they're going to do is pull out, they're going to say, "Let me see your policies," right? So you give them your policies because you printed them off the box, and they're going to say, "Oh, look, it says here that you do badging for visitors. How come you didn't badge me?"
So they're going to wait. So they're going to take your rules that you have in that, and then judge you against
that you adopted for yourself, and see if you are acting, if you're behaving in accordance with your own rules that you say you have adopted. Those are your rules.
So essentially, you're kind of writing law for yourself.
You are writing law for yourself,
okay.
Yeah.
So that's why you would want to hire somebody like you to come in and really, because I know we talked about this before, there's the word reasonable appears a lot in the HIPAA law and in the high-tech law. And so I think the way you explained it to me was don't write law for yourself that's so strict that you can't even follow.
Right. But at the same time, you've got to know the things that you can cut out and the things that you cannot cut out and that you must integrate into your business operations.
Right.
Because if you don't integrate the required things into your business operations under HIPAA, then you have a violation. You see what I'm saying? So you have to know the difference between what's required by HIPAA and what is in those pre-made policies that don't apply to you, that you can just be like, yeah, I don't want it. So
now, this is just a quick off-the-cuff question here, but let's just say you have a doctor's office with a really, really expensive piece of equipment that the company that makes the equipment no longer updates. And so they may have like a Windows XP computer attached to it. So if you just look at it on the surface, you say, hey, that thing's got to go. But the doctor says, well, it's going to cost me $250,000 to replace that. Can we put a technical control, like a sandbox or something, to allow that system to still exist, perform its functions, but be isolated from other systems, or be scrutinized using network tools and security tools more strictly than other systems?
I think you just answered your own question. It would need some sort of alternative controls.
Absolutely.
Because I mean, I understand, and we're not here to tell people no, you can't do something and you've got to do everything just the way I say or the way the law says. The law is actually very flexible, and it's just knowing what you have to do as additional controls. So you may not only need technical controls, but you may need training controls, you may need some administrative controls, you may need physical controls to protect that equipment because it is so vulnerable. But and of course with XP, it's going to be really heavily weighted toward technical.
Yeah, it is. So the reason I ask that question is because I have seen situations like that, and I guess it would be valuable to have a good partner doing this type of an assessment, and a good attorney, somebody who can kind of translate and interpret the law and its flexibility, so that you can say, okay, you don't have to go out and buy a new $250,000 MRI or X-ray machine, but you do need to buy a $1,000 firewall and maybe do a little bit of extra cabling to then fence off this computer or this system, so that it can be scrutinized differently, so that if it gets affected, it can't affect anything else, or if anything else gets affected, that's not compromised.
Yeah, and I'm not here to just tell people what they want to hear. I also would say that you also it would be reasonable for you to begin budgeting for replacement of that particular item.
Absolutely. That's always smart to budget for something. Yeah. But obviously, when you're looking at large pieces of equipment like that, as a business owner, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, but it works. I don't want to buy a new one just because it needs a new version of Windows.
Yeah.
And so me as an IT guy coming in and telling a doctor, hey, you got to spend $250,000 because your Windows is old, it just doesn't feel very good.
Okay, that brings up another thing. All right, so think about these operating systems that are scheduled to go out of date, right? Okay,
Absolutely.
they're not going to be supported after a certain date. And I watched a seminar. I think you actually referred it to me, and the gentleman who was presenting was laying out all the projected expiration dates for the different operating systems. And so these things are known, folks. So I would say if you know the dates, and it might be a good idea to figure out, are you on Windows 7, 8, 10, I mean, what are you using? Whatever it is, figure out what the date is that is no longer going to be supported, and make sure that you have the money budgeted before that date. I think 10 is like 2023, and 8 is like 28, not 18, but 2020 or something. So.
Lisa, what you're talking about is smart business. So I mean, it's really being reasonable and sensible with your business, and really planning ahead. Planned obsolescence for software these days is just a reality. I know that a lot of us, myself included, I mean, I'm pretty old school. Even though I'm young, I'm still old school. I like stuff to last a long time. And one of the things I hate the worst about my industry is the whole planned obsolescence. But hey, it's job security, right? But I really hate that part of it. But at the same time, technology progresses so quickly that you really need to kind of sunset some things so that other things can flourish and grow. And so by, say you spend that $250,000 10 years ago, the day you're done paying that off or the day you're done writing that check, you need to start putting money in the bank for the next iteration of that piece of hardware.
Well, the vulnerabilities keep growing. So when you have a new system or something, the vulnerabilities grow. And oftentimes they create a new system that has none of those vulnerabilities. It's like, oh. So then, everybody starts on the same playing field again. And, of course, the hackers get busy and, whoever it is over at some of these other countries who do this as a job, they get another team going, to figure that one out. But,
And it's interesting. We see it in firewalls a lot, where the vulnerabilities grow so fast that the firewall hardware can't even keep up, and that's where you get slowdowns. Mm-hmm. So we're actually having to, even though the specs, we might be seeing a client where they have, 15 employees, and the specs on the firewall say 20 to 30 employees. We're going and having to go the next step for 50 to 75. It costs a little bit more money, but it gives us room to grow, and not only to grow the business, but as the vulnerabilities grow and as the complexity of scanning that data flowing through the firewall, because literally every bit that flows through the firewall has to open it, read it, look at it, determine whether it's malicious or not, and make a decision as to whether it's going to continue to serve you that bit of information or if it's going to block it and say, hey, you're not getting through, you're bad. So, that's a very complex operation, and a lot of times when that operation slows down, it manifests itself in, hey, my YouTube videos are buffering, or hey, my files are taking a little longer to download. Yeah, it's annoying, but, again, we want to stay ahead of that curve by sizing the hardware. So we've kind of beat all over the bush here and kind of gone, let's get to the exciting stuff here.
Tell them what happened. My gosh.
That was crazy.
Wow.
Okay. So the first thing I noticed was they had, and this was a good thing, they had a computer closet, and the closet was air conditioned. And that's important because computers get hot. Hot computers are angry. And angry computers don't work. So we want to keep them cool. And they had to actually use their thumbprint to get into the room.
That's very advanced.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool.
Most people don't have that. That's good.
Right. So my first question was, hey, who else's thumbprint opens that room? And so they knew exactly who opened that room, and that was great. So I was encouraged, and then I walk in, and I see it looks like a spider ran their cable. I mean, cables everywhere.
Oh my!
All right. Now, from an IT standpoint, I like to have things organized.
I've seen your data center. Oh my!
Yeah, it's cool, isn't it? That's all Ryan.
It is so beautiful and organized. Oh my gosh, it's gorgeous.
But I like to have things organized, just because whenever something goes wrong, it's easier to find the cable. It's easier to trace the problem.
Well, I mean, look, this feeds into your resilience plan. This is something that, under HIPAA, they want you to have some sort of resilience and emergency operations plan. Well, what are you doing in an emergency? You're panicking. So you don't need to be racing through a rat's nest of wires to try to figure out what's going on.
Absolutely. So that was my first warning that something wasn't kosher here. Then I go in and so I look at their firewall and I lift one up and the power cable just gives loose and one firewall's gone.
No.
So the power cable is actually broken. I come to find out the power cable's broken, and there's no way to keep it in the firewall where it would stay. So you have to very carefully just put it right there.
No.
Yeah, so one firewall's gone. What's weird was nobody complained. Nobody in the office complained. So now we've got firewalls here that nobody knows what they do, and they're just there.
Oh, my.
There were 3 or 4 internet connections. Nobody knew which one was the primary. And there were 3-4 network switches all strung together.
Who was doing their IT?
So they had a guy, but he retired, and he didn't want to do it anymore.
Okay.
So then they have this guy that does their facilities and plant that does their IT too. Like
he's the one that orders like the guys to come and fix the ceiling
and all that stuff.
Yeah, HVAC and
Yeah. So I can't. This is a huge facility, big facility.
Okay.
I can't imagine how busy this guy is. Top of that, to have to deal with IT. I mean, that's just crazy.
That I can't imagine. But I mean, it's an unusual set of skills.
Yeah, it really is. So if you can find somebody that can do all that stuff, more power to you. But my recommendation, though, is, you really need to leave these things to people that actually know what they're doing. I asked him, what's your comfort level with this stuff? And he said, oh, I'm pretty savvy, but I may need some help with a few things. And so I asked him several questions, like, okay, I need your router password so I can log in, look and see if you have any open ports, see what VPNs you might have to other locations. And then I need your server password so I can see how the server's set up and all that. Couldn't give me a lick of it. And I'm thinking, okay, if you're in charge of the computers.
Who has it?
He couldn't find it.
Well, how would they function if it went down?
No idea whatsoever.
Well.
So, I guess this might be a good point to stop and ask you from a legal standpoint, what have we seen here so far, or from a HIPAA and high-tech standpoint?
Well, one of the things that I've seen, especially hospitals do it with specialized equipment, especially in the emergency room or operating room areas, you'll see people keeping an extra set of cabling and things like that. So if you have unusual cabling or plugs or whatever, buy an extra one. When you get it, just buy an extra one. Keep it in a cabinet that's labeled for that, so that if you have an emergency, your cabling fails and you need to replace it right away, then you have one there. Because if you have to go try to find it or order it, even though we have Amazon now, which is very cool, but it doesn't deliver everything now. So, you might be in the middle of a procedure and then, oh my gosh.
Exactly.
My internet went down, and now what I do, I was watching YouTube about how to do brain surgery. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my goodness, if my doctor were watching YouTube to figure out how to work on it, we'd have some words.
Well, some people do watch YouTube to try to figure out how to do their network,
Yeah,
so
it happens. It happens. So,
so you fixed my stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, YouTube is a very powerful research tool. From a HIPAA standpoint, what's your concern with their plant guy doing their IT?
Well, I would just be concerned about training. There is a responsibility under HIPAA to have a security officer. You don't have to have a privacy officer. I recommend it because there is that. If you're a business associate, it's a little bit different. Even though you're not required to have a security officer or a privacy officer, and a lot of BAs say, well, we don't do that because we're not required. And that's fine, but it is best practice, because if you don't have that one person that everybody knows to call if there's an incident, that person's trained. They're the one that's going to be the ringmaster. You should have a backup. That person has to be properly trained, and they have to have a job description.
That's very true.
under HIPAA, they have to have a written job description for it's, they ask you that question. Do you have a written job description for your security officer? So it's a good idea to have one. There are templates out there, but again, the template is something that you have to customize to your own operations and what you're doing.
So you mentioned BA, that's business associate, and you mentioned that they should have training. So the training should be ongoing. In this case, I asked them, do you have your HIPAA manuals? So nobody knew where they were. They had to go hunt and find them. It took them almost 15 minutes.
This is not unusual.
Right. And then I assume then they don't even know who their HIPAA security officer and privacy officers are.
Well, we did some work for a rather large organization in the medical field, and they had several offices, and they had in their policy manual, they had the identity of the security officer in there. These were downloaded, forms that they had gotten for their policies, and they had inserted the name of their security officer, and that was their security officer. So we went around to every single office and asked, so who would you call if there were a breach or there were a problem? And I got a million different answers. Nobody knew. And the security officer was pretty sure that everybody knew that she was a security officer, but the other people didn't know it. And it was in writing, and everybody was dead set on telling me that when employees were onboarded, that they were trained in all this and they were told all these things. Think about it, folks. You hire somebody, you onboard them, you're giving them this fire hose of information over a period of 2 or 3 days, and you expect them to remember that for the rest of their life while they're trying to learn your business. that's not going to happen. And you know what? Even after a year, heck, after 6 months, I don't know what I said to you. So you better come back in and talk to me again. Let's review. Where are we?
It's crazy. I used to do some door-to-door just spot checks just to see if I could do some lead gen for with medical clinics. And one of the questions I'd ask, I'd just walk in, hey, who's your HIPAA compliance officer? And man, I would ask that, and people would be immediately so defensive.
They thought you were from SCR.
I mean, it was remarkable, but none of them knew.
Yeah.
None of the places I visited knew who their HIPAA compliance
That's
officer
real basic.
was.
Yeah.
And that's an instant audit trigger. If I were from the OCR, Office of Civil Rights, which handles HIPAA complaints, I mean, that right there is just an immediate trigger to go hunting. And when they go hunting, they go. I mean, for them, any little bit of smoke is reason enough to find the fire. And based on experience, there's plenty of fire out there to find. So moving on, I kept looking through. They have a generator on site, which is good.
That is good.
If you're doing surgery, that's good. That's also good for disaster recovery and for redundancy. Again,
I have a UPS.
There you go, UPS.
I had it wired in. So I have all my equipment attached to the UPS.
Cool.
How do you like that?
Sweet.
Yeah.
That's awesome. But for a medical facility, you want a generator.
Right.
I bring up with clients disaster recovery plans. And the scenario with medical clients is if now again, this is just another off-the-cuff question that we haven't discussed, but if the data you're keeping could be necessary in an emergency, that should be a trigger for a robust disaster recovery plan that gets your data accessible as quickly as possible.
Well, here's the concerns with disaster recovery. Okay, under HIPAA, these are the concerns. The concerns don't change from normal. The normal concerns with your data and security is confidentiality, integrity, and availability, right? The CIA of security. So confidentiality, integrity, availability. So those are the same concerns that you are supposed to be adhering to during the disaster. So the disaster recovery plan must address each of those concerns, saying how are you going to operate during that disaster. So what is that plan? How are you going to keep this stuff confidential? How are you going to make sure you have the integrity that this is the actual and the full medical record, let's say, that I'm dealing with, and how are you going to make sure that it's available? I mean, availability we can do through backups and all that, but
now the availability, the A part is actually where the cost really can come in for a clinic. The more available they need their data, the higher the cost it's going to be to make it available. In my industry, the term is the recovery time objective.
Okay.
How quickly do you need to be back up and running in case of a disaster? And the reason I ask this is some medical clinics that don't provide or don't store any records that are going to be, critical. For example, a pediatrician's office, if you've got a kid in the ER, with a peanut allergy or something and they need data, they need it now, right? But let's just say a chiropractor's office where what they have may not necessarily be, time sensitive, or an eye doctor, anything like that where it may not be sensitive. Can that be taken into account when writing those disaster recovery plans so you can say, you know what, this clinic just needs backup, but this clinic needs a backup and disaster recovery device that can get their server up and running immediately in case of a disaster?
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's you make a really good point that you do have to classify your data and your assets. Guess what? Assets also include people. How important is that office manager or that surgical nurse or somebody who knows this stuff really well,
right? Or
your compounding pharmacist or whatever? What protections do you have? What alternatives do you have? What they almost want you to have is like a plan B for things, and like how you're gonna hook things up or relocate to a place where you can operate.
Right. Awesome. So moving on through those things. So we talked about their generator, and that led into disaster recovery. Here's something I asked. Do they have a monitored security system? And the answer was no. So why would a doctor's office need to have a monitored security system, or why would a clinic or a surgical center need to have that?
Well, it's real smart to do. Obviously, you want to know who's coming and going from the office. How are you going to keep track if there is some sort of stuff that goes missing? Let's say you've got a box of PHI, protected health information, that goes missing, and you find it the next morning, and you don't know who came in that night before. Then how are you ever going to say, well, somebody here took it? Okay, who?
Right.
Because if you have a monitor and alarm system with unique codes for every person who accesses the office, then you can track that. I mean, it's very simple.
Which is a great segue to the next set of findings I got. So I saw a lot of computers there that had Windows 7 Professional and Windows 7 Home and Windows 10 Home and Windows 10 Professional. So it was a big hodgepodge. And one of the big things that I always tell folks is, look, you got to use the professional edition of Windows in Business. For one, it's licensed for business use. Home is not. But the other aspect of it is, and this is a HIPAA requirement or high-tech requirement if you want to be really technical, it requires that each person have a unique identifier on the system, which is not possible in a uniform and manageable way with Windows Home Edition. So, when I'm looking at all of this, I mean, what's the risk there?
Well, that's where you're really getting into the technical rule, the security rule, the technical part of the security rule under HIPAA as well, because you certainly have to track who is accessing the data. I mean, who is that? Your people, I don't care how great your IT professional is or your security professional, they're never going to be able to know if you don't track that. You have a unique user ID, so you know who is coming and going, just like you do through a door, and logging, so that you're logging the right things. You're not just logging everything. You'll run out of storage real fast, right? But you need to log the things that are meaningful to be looked at. And that's why I always say, if you're not with managed services, you need to get there, because that is probably your biggest protection, to have someone who can remotely sort of protect your system and monitor the events in your system. It's somebody's job. This is not something you want to do as just something that you also do, like you wash your clothes while you go work out. It's not like that.
Right.
It's
I've
a job.
run into, folks that say, hey, I've got my cousin that does this on the side for me and things like that. And that might have been acceptable, in the early 2000s, late 90s. But this day and age, IT, cybersecurity, with everything connected, it really, it can't be a part-time, when I can, hobby type of thing. You really need a professional handling this type of stuff.
Well, the other thing is I want to point out before you leave that topic is it's which device joined the network and which device used that particular login ID and from what IP address. I mean, where is this user coming from? Whose credentials are they using? And what device is it? Is it an authorized device? Is it a device that you said it was okay? I was on a system with a mutual client the other day, and I tried to go to a website, and it wouldn't let me in, and I started laughing. I said, "Oh, Angel doesn't like my website. Oh, my goodness."
Lisa's the only person that laughs whenever we block a website. Everybody else just hates it.
No, I just called in.
They hate it a lot.
I just called in. I'm like, guys, I need to get on this website, and they were like, okay. So yeah.
So no, I appreciate that, because like I said, not everybody laughs whenever we block a website.
That's what you're supposed to do.
But it
That's
is, it is what you're paying us to do.
Right. So I was like, I wanted this to happen for my client, but now it's getting me.
We can unblock it, but yeah. Okay. So definitely we want to use that professional operating system. We want to have it as a part of a domain, because the domain has a central user database. We can push out group policy that can push out screen locking policies that can track logons and log-offs. Again, it's auditable. One of the things I've run into is, I might have a peer that lacks sophistication in the security area, and in the effort and best interest of getting the client up and running, they destroy evidence about a security incident.
Oh my gosh, yes, I see this. Oh, please don't destroy evidence. Please, please,
yeah.
please.
Yeah, it's not good.
No, and one of the things you can do very quickly to destroy evidence is unplug your computer when you have an incident. Please don't unplug the computer. Please just go ahead and take it off the internet.
Yeah, take the network connection off.
Right.
If it's Wi-Fi, turn off your Wi-Fi. I mean, just do whatever you can. But sometimes we need to leave what's running on the computer running because that may be the only time we get to see it active. Because it stays in memory, and then once you unplug it, it's gone. So that is very, very valuable advice. Now, it is critical that if it's something like that you get somebody on it right away, because obviously you can't keep that computer running forever. So you do need to have somebody competent. And I'll be the first to tell you that's not a competency that we have here. It is something that we have to rely on others for, and I'll be the first to admit that because, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we know how to do something when we don't. I don't do that kind of a disservice to clients. We'll bring somebody in who's a security expert who knows how to do forensics, because when a security incident happens, you want to try to reconstruct what happened and how it happened so you can answer. The golden question here is, was anything taken? And if anything was taken, what was taken?
Or was accessed,
Or accessed, right. So if it was accessed, we definitely want to know what was accessed so that we can then scope the size of the breach, and then we apply several legal rules according to the scope of the breach. So
we have duties based on what happened, and
exactly.
so if once we know what happened technically, then we can serve the client and we can say, okay, based on these studies that our technical people did, this is what our duties are, our legal duties are, and maybe we don't have any. Wouldn't that be nice? Sometimes that happens.
Now there is an assumption if you can't answer the question. What's the assumption?
Well, the assumption is that you should report.
That everything was taken and that you got
right.
You got
you have to assume that they're in and they got everything.
If you can't answer the question, the assumption is that, all of your clients have been affected by this. So if you can say, look, we only know that 10 people were affected. There are much less visible from a PR standpoint, much less costly, from a budgeting standpoint, and I'll use the word embarrassing for lack of better words. It ties into PR, but it's a much less visible situation than if you have, say, 600 records affected.
Well, you know what? I think, though, people have a little fatigue on this. It's kind of like during hurricane season. I feel like I'm doing the pre-hurricane season report. Like, okay, it's time for everybody to get ready for hurricane season. Go buy your water, go get your batteries and make sure you got flashlights at work and stuff. But what I'm trying to say is there is a way to go through these types of storms, these types of data problem storms. We call them incidents. Unless you know it's a breach, don't call it a breach because that's sort of an admission. So you don't want to say that, it's call it an incident. But when you have an incident, there is sort of a ballet. And I will say that your team has been there on the fly. You cannot get the forensics and security people in right away very often.
Right.
Okay, so they are about 2 weeks out, and so it is touchy because you've got reporting timelines. In Florida, you've got 10 days or 30 days, depending on who you are.
You've got reporting timelines, and you know what? If our tools can help answer those basic questions on the front end, we may not need to involve the forensics people. We can get the business back up and running and making money again.
Well, this is the thing. It's I think documentation. Whatever you do to that system that's been compromised has to be written down and put in one place so that you know what to do. By the way, folks, if something like this happens to you, let's say you have a denial of service and you're not able to use your system, or there's something going on and your email is sending out 1 billion emails to all your closest friends. Well, at that point, I would say, okay, first we need to disconnect that now. How are you going to communicate, let's say, to your IT people and to me or your outside counsel, who should be your first call to call the IT people, because I can protect you with attorney-client privilege. We've gone through that before on this channel. But I would say, how are you going to establish what is your alternative means of communication? You've got to establish some sort of bridge, an outside bridge. Don't use your email if it's been compromised. Hello, the hackers might be looking at exactly what you're saying.
That's a terrible thing. And actually, I had a client whose email was compromised.
Oh God!
And so until we could determine, how bad the compromise was, don't touch email.
Yeah.
We could change passwords, but we didn't know how far in, the attacker got. And again, that's because
forensics hadn't been done yet.
The forensics hadn't been done yet, and also best practices weren't followed. When we pick up, clients, we always move quickly to try to establish those baselines. Sometimes we may find, we've been moving through it, and all of a sudden we discover that there's been an attacker in the system from before we were there.
Right.
So, we want to take that, move swiftly and have that plan already in place. If we have it in place, and this isn't just for medical practices. This is going to be all across the board. Now, obviously, medical practices, because of HIPAA and high tech, they're going to be scrutinized heavily on these plans. But regular businesses, it's just good business to have these plans in place beforehand, so that when something happens, you don't have to think about it.
Well, and by the way,
what to do.
It's not just HIPAA. It's not just doctors.
You're absolutely right.
Okay, there's anybody who takes credit cards has to comply with PCI.
Yep.
Okay, but let's even take care of all that. Okay, the FTC is charged is the consumer protection arm of the federal government.
Federal Trade Commission.
That's correct. So one of their two jobs is consumer protection. So one of their things that they do is they have brought suit against people for terrible privacy or security practices with data, and they have won, where they're saying that a deficient privacy or security practice has been deemed an unfair or deceptive trade policy.
Wow.
So that brings you into violation of the FTC Act, which then can bring you into violation also under your governing state little FTC Act, like Florida.
Right. Florida's got the Florida Information Protection
to,
Act, which is a breach notification law.
That's a breach notification, and that's different than the little FTC Act.
Okay. So there you go. So one little incident or event could trigger so many, and if you do business in multiple states, some states write the law this way, others write it differently, but the state of Florida says any company or organization inside the state or outside the state that does business with people who are residents in the state have to follow that law. So, when you start talking about multi-state stuff, it gets really complicated.
Yeah, it is. And there's tools that we use to talk about, breach notification and compliance with multiple state laws at once. Because obviously, if you're in a situation like this, time is of the essence. And so we subscribe to tools. They're not cheap, but they're very good, and they give us the landscape right away. Of course, we go and we verify everything that we're looking at with the primary source, but it gives us a great place to start quickly.
Awesome.
To help people.
Awesome. So let's see. I'm looking through here. When I finally got the HIPAA manual, the date on the manual was 2003. Now, why is that a concern?
Well, HIPAA changed in 2009, and then again in 2013. And so it's like really outdated. So it's not up to speed with the current law.
And when I went to the page with their security policies and procedures, I found that the date on that was 2011, and then I turned the page and the rest of the binder was empty.
Yeah, well, okay, so I have one thing to say about that. There must have been something going on in 2011 when all these medical practices were handed, as part of being a medical doctor, a policy dated in 2011, because for some reason they're all out there. And that's what they're using. I was just in a very large practice in 2016 they were using the same document. I'm almost sure because it was 2011 on top of it, and it was wrong. So
now, is it safe to assume that at this point they probably don't train their employees on proper HIPAA policies and procedures on a regular basis?
Well, here's what I find with training, and this is very interesting because I also like the training in a box where you can have people go and look at a training module and do it on their own time, because that's very convenient, especially for a large business. But I also find that the management is really the problem, and I hate to say that, but very often and mostly they don't follow up to make sure that everybody has done their training on time. So following up.
In all due fairness, though, when you talk to all these management folks, they're great people.
Mm-hmm,
they mean very well.
They do.
But they probably have more work piled on top of them.
Oh, no, they got too much on their plate.
That they just can't focus.
So you got to delegate. You got to do somebody's got to be in charge of training. Somebody needs to be the training king or queen.
Now, does that have to be the management person?
No.
So you can delegate that to somebody else?
Sure you can, but you're still responsible. But
right.
But you should be. The security officer is responsible for that.
Responsible, but you can
legally responsible.
But you can delegate the action of getting it done.
Of course
so
you
that
can.
You can at least say, hey, when's our next training? And you can leave that responsibility of scheduling that to somebody else.
That's right.
And it takes a little bit of the load off, because I have not met a single instance of one of these management folks that isn't just overwhelmed.
No, they're all overwhelmed, and they're all amazingly good people.
Yeah.
My concern is that there's often not a firm culture, and what the law enforcement, ONC especially, they're looking for a culture of compliance. OCR and ONC. Sorry.
I'm
ONC.
trying to keep up for the benefit of anybody watching. I'm trying to keep up with the TLAs, the three-letter acronyms. And so she threw out ONC, and I'm sitting here thinking, uh-oh.
No, OCR. Sorry, OCR.
Office of Civil Rights.
Yes, exactly. So basically, what I'm seeing though in these training modules is they don't cover certain things, and this is where your periodic training, maybe quarterly lunch and learns or something in your office, you can have someone come in. I have a slide that I use in my presentations, and it has a picture of these two paramedics, and they were arrested. This was a HIPAA violation for having a selfie war with unconscious patients in their respective ambulances. Yes. So now there's no online training about emails and phishing and all that kind of stuff that's going to train you not to do that. Now, not that you would have to be told not to do that, but apparently there are, and I would say this speaks more to the training that is needed at the management level. Management seems to think that they will never be the source of any kind of problem. It's actually going to be the other people that work for them. That is really not true. It's equal. So
the facility I was at does colonoscopies. Mm-hmm. It's not the place I would want a selfie with.
And there have been some, so I'm just saying.
Having that culture of compliance and understanding what is and is not acceptable is important. Mm-hmm. And I would probably call myself a pretty level-headed guy that's reasonable. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, not everybody is like that, and not everybody has the sense to realize that selfie wars around patients is probably not a good idea.
No, but that also speaks to the fact that if you have a device in the office, nothing can protect. I don't care what kind of technology you have in place. You can't protect from somebody taking screenshots of documents or of your computer, of documents that are maybe on your desk. So that's another risk. So you need to think about your bring your own device BYOD policies.
Right.
And
we've seen it at Tampa General.
Shanakia Benton and her little pals. Yeah, absolutely. It was in the news. So
even celebrity privacy was violated. Apparently, when celebrity privacy is violated, that's a bigger deal when our privacy is violated. So, but it does bring awareness to the situation that even though it may seem like common sense to you and me that we don't do these things, that we don't share this private information, not everybody has that kind of common sense.
Well,
so
the
that's why
thing
we
is,
have to spell it out and train and get it out there so that everybody understands that yes, or no, this behavior is not acceptable.
well, and most people also think that all of their employees, I mean, sometimes, people are actually fooled by employees that have been long-term employees. And so, it's trust but verify every time and every day, because, they say, who was it? IBM, I think, came up with the number, like 44% or something of the hacks or the breaches come from evil insiders. 44%. That's a pretty scary number, because that's not mistakes, that's evil insiders.
Yeah, that's just intent.
Yeah.
Right there. Somebody's intent on doing damage.
Yeah.
So
They mean to. Yeah.
So moving along, and to me this was the saddest part of the entire situation, was when I met with the doctor who owned the practice, and when I brought up the fact that hey, we really need to do a full risk assessment. What I have here isn't a risk assessment; it's just kind of getting an idea and figuring out scoping of what to do here. But we really need to do a risk assessment. When's the last time you had one done? And the doctor said, I don't know. And then I asked him, well, okay, then let's get one scheduled. And he looked at me and he said, you know what, we'll do it on our own. I don't have time for this. I'm done. And he walked out of the room. So, I mean, that to me, that's just culture all the way from the top, and then that bleeds down. His nursing, director of nursing was in the room. And I looked at her face, and I mean, she was just almost pale, shocked to hear him speak that way. She was borderline embarrassed. But I'm just sitting here wondering, wow, I mean, what could be going on inside of the mind of this doctor to react in such an abrupt manner?
Well, a lot of people just kind of reject it. They see it as unnecessary, just like they see insurance or something like that. But given the number of times that these incidents are in the news, and the fact that there are 200,000 different pieces of malware engineered every day, new ones, I just cannot imagine that this is not on people's minds, because they have every business owner. Unfortunately, you're a victim. When you're a victim, you're also a target for law enforcement. You're also a perpetrator. So it's like, how does this happen?
This is one of those really weird situations where the victim could also become, a defendant. Right. And not, this is not civil either. We're talking criminal. Right. They could become a defendant and before a judge in a criminal trial. So kind of to wrap it up, and I'm probably gonna have Jessica write up or help us get some of these tips that we'll share on questions you can ask your doctor to kind of measure where they're at with privacy. And again, this is not to police them, but this is just to say, how you're interested in protecting your own privacy. So the people you do business with and the doctors that you see, you want to make sure that they're taking that seriously too. But in this particular example, I know we don't have a ton of information here, but roughly how much money are we talking about here in fines?
Well, I mean, it's,
90.
You got a cap of 1,000,000.
computers.
So,
that probably have maybe 3 to 5 violations on each computer. So that's.
I mean, you're looking at the max, and I don't know what other regulators might be alerted, because at least the federal regulators can talk to one another, and so is he also in violation of the FTC Act with his privacy policies? Is he adhering to his privacy policy? Is he,
so
lying
what's
to
the
people?
max right now? 1.5 million
per year, I think.
Yeah, and for any business that's not a maybe multi-billion-dollar business
for a certain type of violation. So that's like per violation per.
Getting a $1.5 million fine's got to be a pretty devastating thing. And just looking at this, I mean, roughly from a planning standpoint, what would it cost to kind of get them on the right track?
Oh my goodness. Okay, a business of that size, 70 computers?
70 employees,
70
3 locations.
users, 3 locations. Probably Around $7,000, $7,500.
So let's just say 10
yeah.
to 15 grand of,
I mean, even.
of time,
Right.
and just sitting down, properly assessing the risk. And then from an IT standpoint, we'd probably be looking at maybe $50,000 to $75,000 in equipment, hardware. Because of the age of the systems, this is not a fix and get up and running. It's more of a replace situation. So you'd probably be looking at $50,000 to $70,000 in hardware. You'd probably be looking at maybe $10,000, $15,000 a month worth of ongoing maintenance to make sure that, again, you want to keep this ship straight.
Which, by the way, is not just cut from whole cloth. They have to pay for the maintenance anyway.
Right.
But they're paying for poor maintenance now. Why not pay for good maintenance? Just pay a little bit more.
Right.
And the equipment, it's going to last for a while. It's not like you're going to spend $50,000 every year. You're just spending it now to be resilient for 10 years.
Absolutely. So that, when you look at it up against a $1.5 million fine, I mean, that's pennies.
Well, when you look at each medical record being worth, what, $398 or something, so how many medical records does an office normally carry? About 20,000? I mean, you are talking about some serious chump change here. And so, in an office that has, say, 83,000 records or 100,000 records or something, which is not uncommon.
Right.
You are looking at some real cost. And that's not only then would you have to go and buy all this stuff because you're going to be on some plan and you're going to be on a remedial plan and you're going to negotiate your fine so that you're going to have to promise that you're going to do all this stuff. Why don't you just do it in the first place? It would be a whole lot cheaper. And by the way, then you won't have the incident. So nobody's going to be looking at you.
One thing that I run into a lot, and I know we got to wrap this up. We've been on for almost an hour. But one of the things I run into a lot is, I'll get a doctor's office tell me, I use eClinicalWorks, so my hip is taken care of. eClinicalWorks is a piece of software. Or, I use Vision, or I use, Medix Elite or Streamline, and my hip is taken care of. They take care of it. Is that true?
No.
No. Okay. No. Why not?
Okay. Well, just because, and a lot of doctors say, well, that's HIPAA compliant. Nothing's HIPAA compliant. Okay. It's how you use it. The doctor's offices a business cannot be certified as HIPAA compliant. They'll say, we're HIPAA compliant. So when you see like all these HIPAA certified stuff out there, the products can be, I think there's a certain program through which they can get a designation, but businesses cannot be, and I'll tell you why. Because the second somebody leaves some PHI out on the desk for other people to see, you're out of compliance. There is no way for a business to tell you that they're HIPAA compliant. And to answer your question, just using an EHR that has observed the HIPAA rules and is, HIPAA doesn't require specific things. They require that you take action to accomplish a certain goal, to secure data. You must do this to secure data. You must, keep this private. You must, so they don't tell you how. They just tell you to do it. So there's no, bells and whistles that you can follow. So that particular EHR is not responsible for your practice. You are. You have to comply.
Awesome. Well, Lisa, thank you very much for joining us, and appreciate that you were able to make the time to be with us today. Sure. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them down in the comments. We'll be sure to answer them. And what we're going to do is we're going to make the resource available. Lisa calls it the activated patient. And Lisa and Natalie took some time to get that together for us. And what we'll do is we'll probably do another live or something and go over that whole document and make it available. So thanks for watching. If you hung in here the entire hour, God
you deserve
bless you.
A star.
Time with an IT guy and an attorney. That's exciting. But thanks again, and we will catch you soon. Have a good one.
Bye.